the academic research is being done, and the proof is in. Homeschooling does deliver quality education for families that are willing to invest in it, for sure. There's no doubt about this anymore. So really the threats to the educational establishment are financial, as we've talked about. And certainly for others, there is an ideological component. And we see this in various parts of the world where politicians really do believe that government knows better what is good for kids than parents do.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News. Over the past few months, and in fact extending beyond that, we've brought you a series of stories about how education is under attack. Looking here in our own backyard, right here in Alberta, we've seen the Alberta NDP and progressive activists attacking our school systems, attacking choice in education, some even going so far as to call for one unified education system, eliminating all options and alternatives. Now, thankfully, the UCP election very recently means that for the next 4 years, we don't have to worry about something like that being implemented. But other places across this country, well, they aren't so fortunate. Alberta has a relatively good history when it comes to standing up for and protecting parental rights, but that is not necessarily the case right across this country. When education does come under attack, whether here or, as we mentioned, right across this country, it is often the homeschoolers who get it first. Very likely because they're relatively small, often single families or collective groups coming together as part of homeschool groups. They make easy targets for people who would prey and victimize those choosing alternatives in education. And that is why in 1991, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association of Canada was founded to advocate for the rights of parents who choose or opt for homeschooling. And in just a few moments, I'm going to be joined by their president, Peter Stock, to learn more about the important work that they're doing. Well, thanks for joining me, Peter. Now, attacks against school alternatives are nothing new, but in the early 90s, homeschooling was challenged legally, politically, and socially. The public school establishment was also quite hostile towards home education. Are we seeing a bit of a revival of that hostility in this day and age that was so sort of prevalent back then?
Yes, we are, and I think the reason is quite understandable. We've seen a doubling of the number of homeschooling families, homeschooling students across Canada in the last 3 years. Mostly pushed there by COVID and finding that they liked it. So school boards, education bureaucracies, they've lost a lot of grant money from ministries of education, and it hurts their budgets, and they're noticing it.
Now, the idea of parents as primary educators is also under attack, I'd say. And we're going to talk about motivations maybe a little bit later. But is it actually true that some parents in Canada were even threatened with jail for daring to want to homeschool their kids at some point in relatively recent history?
Yes, that is the history for sure. Parents in Alberta were threatened with jail and fines back in the early days, and that's what led to the founding of our organization. But as recently as 2017 in Quebec, children were threatened with apprehension by school boards for non-attendance at schools.
Wow, that's shocking because we often think of Alberta as a place with our Catholic system still protected that hasn't been as badly targeted. But that's honestly a little bit surprising to hear from me and certainly troubling. Now, you talked about how it was very bad back in the 90s. That's disclosed on your website. Did it get better for a little bit and now the attacks are reemerging? Is it worse or better now than it was, let's say in the 90s, let's say in the 2000s?
Well, I would say that overall it's much better. 30 years ago, homeschooling really did fall into a bit of a gray area in the law, we could say. Now it is the case that homeschooling is legal in all 10 provinces, all 3 territories. However, there are many in government authority positions who either don't understand the law or don't respect it fully. And so we face challenges on a regular basis, generally to individual families. It's not so much to the entire homeschooling movement, but certainly we're getting calls every week from families who are facing a challenge from some sort of government agency.
Now, to play devil's advocate a little bit here and sort of maybe come from their perspective, I personally know that sort of these alternative schooling programs, homeschooling programs, the sort of evidence speaks for itself. They tend to yield better outcomes. They tend to cost the government less money. But for folks who are maybe on the fence about this, or those government people who are coming after people who are choosing these alternatives, how do you strike a balance, and what is the sort of legal basis for ensuring a child gets an adequate education versus sort of respecting parental rights and not having the government overstep in that regard?
Well, what it comes down to is that parents know their children best. They know what they need, and we don't meet parents, quite frankly, who are investing their lives into their children, staying home from a job, costs a little bit of money to homeschool
Mhm.
too. They're making all that sacrifice because they care about their kids. They want the best for them, and so. This is one of the reasons why homeschooling families and homeschooling students in particular tend to succeed.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've seen a quote. I don't know if it's quite accurate, but it's like if you decide to homeschool, you get to spend 20,000 more hours with your kids. To some people, that might sound like a nightmare. I mean, to me, that sounds great, and hopefully to most people. But parents who are willing to say, "I'm willing to spend these 20,000 plus hours extra with my kids," they're probably not people who are disinterested or just trying to get a free pass on education. People who might be a little bit neglectful. The option of just dropping their kids off for 8 hours a day or more, whatever it may be, can certainly be appealing. Now, I wanted to garner your perspective, and I do want to get into a little bit of sort of some of the work that you've done. But I've heard everything from ideologues pushing agendas to unions or school boards seeking grants or seeking that sort of those dollars you get per student that are coming in as the motivations for these attacks, whether it be on charter schools, private schools, or homeschooling. What, in your experience, or what would you suppose are the key driving factors for the people who are opposed to having alternatives and choice in education?
Right, and I think you've hit both of the key reasons. The academic research is being done, and the proof is in. Homeschooling does deliver quality education for families that are willing to invest in it, for sure. There's no doubt about this anymore. So really, the threats to the educational establishment are financial, as we've talked about. And certainly for others, there is an ideological component. And we see this in various parts of the world where politicians really do believe that government knows better what is good for kids than parents do. And that's really the age-old question here.
Yeah. So, can you give us perhaps some examples? Obviously, we've dealt with just in our recent election, many of the NDP advocates, fortunately, they didn't win the election, but they were talking about scrapping all this, having a unified system. There's been attacks against these alternatives. But what are some of the more dramatic cases where you've actually had to legally get involved or intervene to help families who've been targeted? I'm sure there's probably some horror stories.
Well, there are. I suppose on the level of provincial law, we really haven't had to fight a case in a while. The last one was in Quebec. We had the Quebec Court of Appeal. We won at the Quebec Court of Appeal in 2017, and that's one of the things that led to the then government of Quebec changing the law to recognize the right of parents to direct the education of their children. So that was a great day, and that was the last, if you will, the last domino to fall across the country. So we do have homeschooling freedom across the country. But there certainly are people who still believe, again, the government knows better than parents.
And so, how does that start? Is that a family contacts you that's concerned? Do you find these cases? How does something like this begin from your organization's perspective?
Yeah, typically we're getting a call from a family that's that's being challenged on some level. Sometimes it has nothing directly to do with homeschooling. It might be a family law matter, or perhaps another child in the family who's in the public system. And the school system is not happy to see some of the family in the system and some of the family out. And so troubles can start a number of ways. We also tend to face trouble at the beginning of the school year. You get a new superintendent in charge of a school district who is eager to, make sure that everybody's getting a great education, and starts asking for more information they're entitled to. We have regular run-ins with folks who think they know better than parents. Once again.
So that 2017 ruling, Now, that says for the time being, at least, that this is a right. What is the risk of that being backtracked with so many politicians obviously wanting to control that space? If you're able to form young minds, you can form voters, you can form policy, you can form culture moving down the stream. So there is a concerted effort. What is the risk of that right disappearing?
Well, that's a very real risk. We have seen, for example, in the country of France, it's a modern democracy, G7 nation, just like Canada, just 2 years ago, decided to severely restrict the ability of parents to homeschool their kids. To the ridiculous point that while they grandfathered kids who are already being homeschooled in the system, younger children who were now of school age and want to homeschool, they're saying, no, you can't. So you've got ridiculous situation where families have some kids who are being homeschooled, same family, other kids can't be, and so yeah, that's happened in France. We have to be particularly vigilant here and make sure it doesn't happen. One of the things I think that stands very much in our favor in Canada is that there are so many families homeschooling now that to try and restrict or eliminate homeschooling is going to cause a very severe reaction.
Yeah. Now, for folks who are maybe interested in this, like you mentioned, currently we're safe, but the price, I think, for preserving choice in education and for maintaining the sort of staple building block of society that parents are primary educators are perpetual vigilance. How can people get involved with your organization if people are concerned or they feel their homeschooling group is being targeted? What's the best way to find you guys, and how can people get involved?
Sure, our website's fairly simple. It's listed with my name there, hslda.ca. For families who just have questions about homeschooling, though, we've set up another website, and I think they'll find great information there. Everything from questions about, what about socialization to, will my children really get a better education? And where do I find resources? So homeschool.today is that website, homeschool.today.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you for taking this time and speaking with me. Of course, if there's anything else we can ever do for you, or if any stories do emerge, be sure to reach out, keep us informed, because we're covering stories like this right across the country. Peter Stock, the president of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association of Canada, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam.
And for everyone at home, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos. One of the reasons that parents might choose alternatives in education, such as homeschooling, is because of the radical progressive ideologies being pushed within our schools on children, very often age inappropriate content. We're covering the protests right across this country of parents who are fed up of the indoctrination of their children within schools, and you can find all of that coverage at stopclassroomgrooming.com. There's also a petition there that you can sign to reject what's happening within our schools.